Hey, Scooby! Scooby, Scooby-Doo, looking for you. Scooby, Scooby-Doo, where are you? All the stars are here, waiting for you. Couldn't have a show without you. Scooby, Scooby-Doo, Scooby, Scooby-Doo.
Hello, Scooby-Doo fans! Welcome to my Season 2 Episode 7 review of the new Scooby-Doo movies. So last time I concluded my 2024 Halloween special with a review of Season 2 Episode 6 of the new Scooby-Doo movies. I hope you guys enjoyed that. It seemed to get quite good reception. You guys loved my little costume gimmick. You guys seemed to enjoy, how the review went. And, that we finally broke the streak of average episodes. But of course, today, I'll be covering Season 2, Episode 7 of the new Scooby-Doo movies, titled The Haunted Candy Factory, which was released on October 20th, 1973. The short synopsis of the episode is, the kids come across a message and a key in a chocolate bar belonging to the Sugar Plum Candy Factory, which was recently bought by Cass Elliot, a singer from the Mamas and the Papas. When her watchman goes missing and Green Glob ghosts are on the loose, the kids find a ton of mysteries. Today's guest star is Cass Elliot. Who is Cass Elliot? Well, she's an old school singer from the 60s and 70s that's most famous for being the singer of the Mamas and the Papas group. But if you're someone my age or younger, you probably aren't too familiar with Cass Elliot, unless if you're more of a classic music fan or, like the particular genre she sings in, which I believe is like folk rock or something like that, like folk type music. If you're someone from the 60s and 70s, you probably are aware of who Cass Elliot is. But like I said, if you're someone my age or younger or a little bit older, you probably have no idea who Cass Elliot is, since she pretty much, died in the early to mid 1970s, and was more famous in the 60s and the early 70s. So unless if you grew up in that time frame, you're probably not too familiar with her. But just in case, you guys aren't familiar who Cass Elliot is, here's just a quick rundown of who she is. So Cass Elliot was an American singer. She was born on September 19th, 1941 in Baltimore, Maryland. Cass Elliot's first music album was with her first trio band called The Big Three, where they recorded their first album called Winkin', Blinkin' and Nod. Then Cass Elliot would join the vocal group called the Mamas and the Papas, who were active from 1966 all the way up to 1969, and that was her most popular group, pretty much jump-starting her career and gaining her some notoriety. Cass Elliot produced 5 albums with the Mamas and the Papas under Dunhill Records. They were all called If You Can Believe Your Eyes and Ears, The Mamas and the Papas, Deliver, The Papas and the Mamas, and People Like Us. Their 3 most popular singles were California Dreamin', Dream a Little Dream of Me, and Monday Monday. After that, Cass Elliot would then begin her solo career into music, and she would dip her toe a little bit into acting, but not that much. She mostly, in the 1970s, besides her most popular song, Dream a Little Dream of Me, she signed with RCA Records and produced 3 solo albums, which were called Cass Elliot, The Road Is No Place for a Lady, and Don't Call Me Mama Anymore. She would also become a regular guest star on TV talk shows and TV variety shows or specials. She had 2 TV variety specials. The first one was called the Mama Cass television program, and the second one was called Don't Call Me Mama Anymore. Sadly, at the time of recording this, Cass Elliot has since passed away. She passed away on July 29th, 1974 in Mayfair, London, which is crazy because she pretty much died not too long after this episode aired. This was in October of 73, and she would die in early 74. So only a couple months after this episode aired, Cass Elliot would unfortunately die. And that's a shame. That she's probably the youngest guest star to die of the new Scooby-Doo movies. I believe she was 32 years old, and yeah, sad to see a woman like her, die so young. So at the time of this episode, Cass Elliot was just really doing guest appearances on TV talk shows, and she was doing live performances, at different venues. So as per usual, I'll be watching season 2, episode 7 of the new Scooby-Doo movies on the new Scooby-Doo movies, the Almost Complete Collection. This Almost Complete Collection has every episode of the new Scooby-Doo movies, minus the Addams Family episode. However, you can go view that episode in good quality on the HBO Max app. Now, what's my experience with Cass Elliot? I'm personally not familiar with Cass Elliot at all. Zero experience. Not really a fan of hers. Cass Elliot was just too old school and before my time. And her dying in 1974 didn't really help things. I mean, even if she had, maybe done more of a career in the 70s and 80s, I'm not sure I would have known her anyways, as her peak was definitely, around, during the 60s. And, also, and her solo career was in the early 1970s. But she's just too old school to me. And also, I'm not really a big music person. I've said this before a couple of times. I think I said this in the Jerry Reed episode. I'm not someone that really is hardcore into music. I like a couple of things here and there, like a couple bands here and there. I like a certain genre, but I'm not, a huge music guy where I know a lot of musicians or watch the Grammys or something like that. I'm not really big into music like that. And so having a musical guest star isn't really a big hook for me because I don't tend to really be that invested or engaged in a musical guest star because I'm just not too familiar with their work because they're in different types of genres and and a lot of them are old school, especially in this especially when it comes to the new Scooby-Doo movies. So I'm just not really familiar with Cass Elliot's, music career. I haven't seen it. I haven't, heard any of her music. I'm not familiar with her at all. I'm not familiar with her life or, her as a person. So this is a completely new experience for me. But I do want to ask you guys, what's your experience with Cass Elliot? Are you a fan of Cass Elliot? Not so much. And what do you think of her guest appearance on the new Scooby-Doo movies? Do you think it was a good fit? Not so much? Let me know in the comments section and, we can have a discussion about it. Now, as far as this episode's reception is concerned, I believe most fans don't really like this episode a lot. It's not viewed very highly by a lot of people. It's considered one of the lesser episodes of the new Scooby-Doo movies. And I noticed that a big criticism that this episode tends to get a lot is the fat jokes. Cass Elliot and Shaggy and a few of the others make a lot of jokes about Cass Elliot's weight because she's a big woman. Now, personally, I guess this is a good time to just get this out of the way. I might mention it in the review too, but I personally don't really give a shit about the fat jokes. I don't think they're that big a deal. Are they pretty cheap and maybe lazy? Sure. Do all of them land? Not really, but some of them do. And to me, it seems like Cass Elliot seemed okay with the jokes in this episode. I feel like, in my head, if Cass Elliot, from my point of view, I think if Cass Elliot was offended or didn't like these jokes, I think she either would have told Hanna-Barbera to cut these jokes out or tone them down, or she would have refused doing this episode at all. So the fact that she's poking fun at herself and making jokes about her weight tells me that she didn't really seem to care or give a shit about her weight. Now, I could be wrong in that respect, but that seems to me what, at least from my point of view, watching this episode, Cass Elliot doesn't seem really that, offended by it, because if she was, why would she take this gig if she was so offended by it? Why wouldn't she stick up for herself and say, I don't want these jokes in this episode, I don't think they're funny? Or so to me, I think it's a little bit like people are just getting angry for her, which is kind of the same thing with with Decoy for a Dog Napper, where people like to say, oh, this has racism and all that. It's just or this has sexism. People are just looking for stuff, and it's not really that big a deal. It's just fat jokes. You know, yeah, they're cheap and lazy, and some of them don't always land. But as long as Cass Elliot seems fine with it, which in my mind, she does seem fine with it, because there's no evidence to the contrary that she didn't like these jokes. So if she's okay with it and she's okay poking fun at herself, then I feel like it's okay for the gang to make fat jokes. Fat jokes it just depends on the context of it. That's the thing with jokes. The context of it is more important than just saying, oh, we can't have fat jokes in it. Well, you can if they're done right. So, like, that's my whole thing. Like, people like to complain about the fat jokes a lot, but I don't really think it's that big a deal. As long as Cass Elliott's okay with it, I'm okay with it. It doesn't matter. Some of them are actually funny, to be quite honest. Some of them don't always land. But it doesn't really matter. As long as Cass Elliott's okay with it, which to me it seems like she was, that's all that matters. So I just feel like I should, get that out of the way, because that's a big criticism that tends to get thrown out there by a lot of people for this particular episode, and I just think it's a bit of a kind of a nonsensical criticism that people just are looking for things that aren't there, criticizing things that aren't there, when jokes can be made about anything as long as you do them in good taste and not in poor taste. You just have to execute it well. You have to be good at it. So I personally think they're fine. I think they were done in good taste. I don't think Hanna-Barbera was trying to be mean-spirited. I think they were just making fun little jokes about it. And if Cass Elliot didn't like them, I feel like she would have said something. And it doesn't seem like she did. So to me, I don't think it's that big a deal. But hey, if you guys don't like it, then yeah, this might not be the episode for you. If you don't like fat jokes, this definitely has a good amount of them. But I would suggest at least giving it a try and not being dismissive of it just because it has fat jokes. But anyway, is this episode, another good episode, like the last one? Does it continue the trend of good episodes, or will we fall back to average or even bad episodes? So does this episode continue the trend and the streak of good episodes to 2? Is it a shitty episode that, is not great? Or does it bring us back to average episodes and continue and revitalize a new streak of average episodes? Well, let's find out, shall we? So let's take a look at the episode to see whether I think it is a good or bad episode of the new Scooby-Doo movies. The episode begins with the gang driving through a storm late at night. They are lost in a rundown factory area and stop in front of the Sugar Plum Candy Factory. A Cass Elliott's golden caramel bar is tossed at the Mystery Machine, and Scooby takes a good bite of the candy bar, only to hurt his teeth as they find a skeleton key inside with a note. The note says this.
It says, "Help, I'm a prisoner in the candy factory, signed Cass Elliot."
Cass then yells out of the upper window, saying she's being held prisoner until she's hauled off. Freddy unlocks the candy factory door with the skeleton key, and they find the inside quite eerie. We also see 2 mud-like men float after the gang and demand that they depart. They then dip Shaggy in ginger candy and turn him into a Ginger Man statue, which Scooby gets to promptly eating. Meanwhile, Freddy, Daphne, and Velma fall down a secret passage after the Glob men throw a switch. In the basement, they find Cass Elliot, who says she also fell through a trapdoor, though that doesn't make sense and isn't consistent with what we saw earlier, because, like I said earlier, it was shown that Cass Elliot was hauled off by one of the Glob men. She was yelling out the window, and then one of them, came from behind and took her. So, which happened? Did the Glob men take her and lock her in a room? Or did she fall through a trapdoor? Or was she pushed down a trapdoor? What the hell happened? That's not consistent with what we saw earlier. They hear an electrical grinding noise that Cass Elliot says has been happening ever since she bought the place. The gang reunite after Shaggy throws down some licorice to pull Cass, Freddy, Daphne, and Velma out of the trapdoor. I love the scene of Shaggy and Scooby saving Fred, Daphne, Velma, and Cass Elliot from the basement when they're trapped. I think it's really cool because we get to see, Scooby and Shaggy have a couple jokes. We get to see Shaggy use some critical thinking to try and figure out how he can get his friends out, as well as Cass Elliot. And we get, some fat jokes as well, which I think were actually quite well executed and actually funny. Like I said before, fat jokes, as long as they're executed well, and as long as Cass Elliott's okay with it, which, like I said, seems like she was in on the jokes. She made a few herself. I don't think it's that big a deal. But like I said, if you're not into fat jokes, this episode may not be for you. But I personally thought the fat jokes were all right. I think, the fat jokes here were funny, and they were executed quite well. And I don't think they were done mean-spirited at all. And I think Cass Elliot was just having fun and poking at herself. It doesn't seem like she was, uncomfortable making these jokes. At least not for anything. There's no evidence to the contrary that says that she was. So to me, it seems like she was fine with it. So, but yeah, I love the scene. Shaggy and Scooby being productive and having and saving the rest of the gang along with Cass Elliot, as well as a couple of fun jokes.
Okay already, you don't have to lick the plate clean.
Shaggy, help!
That's Freddy. I think it's coming from that door. Freddy! Freddy, is that you?
We found Cass Elliot, but we're trapped down here. Look for a secret switch.
I'm looking.
Me too.
I'm sandwiched between two slices of door.
Sandwich? Sandwich?
You've chopped on me enough for one night, Scoob. And now give me a paw with this, Scoob.
Find some rope so we can climb out of here.
Rope? Right. Let's see now. Rope. What's this? Licorice machine. Hey, that ought to do it. It's licorice rope, but it's rope. Cool it, Scoob. This is for emergency purposes. Okay, Fred. Here it comes. Have you got the end yet, Freddy?
No,
You haven't? Did you get it yet?
not yet.
Huh? Man, you must be 10 floors below. Hey, give me that, Scoob.
Okay, Shag, I see it now. You must have just started feeding it.
Wrong. I just stopped feeding it.
Okay, Cass, you can climb up now.
You gotta be kidding. I'm a singer, not a climber. Well, here goes nothing. If I ever get out of here, it'll be strictly grapefruit. Breakfast, lunch, dinner, and in between snacks.
Cass, what happened?
What happened is too many Cass Elliot caramel bars.
Uh-oh. Something tells me we have a queen-size problem.
Hook!
Hey, Scooby's got a great idea. We can get her out with that hook.
Only how do we get it to work?
It's got to be one of these. Molasses machine, chocolate whipper, taffy machine, ceiling conveyor. That must be it.
Grab hold of this hook, Cass, and we'll try to pull you out.
Got it!
Okay, Shaggy, hoist away.
Here goes. Yikes! Something tells me this contraption wasn't designed for such a load. Help!
Cass, let go!
You asked for it! Butterfingers.
Butter never spread like this.
The gang hear the grinding noise once more and discover Mr. Crink, the foreman, locked in a storage closet by the Globmen. Mr. Crink calls the building a creepy factory and quits on the spot. With no staff, the gang volunteer to help run the factory, and we also meet Mr. Franklin, the night watchman, who has worked at the factory for 50 years. As he walks off, one of the green globs snatches Mr. Franklin and disappears. The gang hear a machine running and watch as the green globs start making candy. The gang investigates the candy and sees that the candy is being sent to 13 Avenida del Sur, Rio de Janeiro, in Brazil. Finding this fishy, the gang split up to look for more clues and encounter several haunted hijinks involving the green globs, along with lots of fun with various pieces of candy, such as marshmallows, peanuts, bubblegum, and candy canes. Shaggy, Scooby, and Cass Elliot eventually find Mr. Franklin amidst a mountain of chocolate Easter bunnies. Mr. Franklin then chases after a green glob and tackles it. Unfortunately for Mr. Franklin, he's no match for it and is carried off once more. For some odd reason, there's an abrupt cut between, two scenes that are happening. So after Shaggy and Scooby, get a bellyache, after they've had so much to eat, Cass Elliot asks Scooby to, start sniffing the trail and look for Mr. Franklin. So he does, and then it abruptly cuts, and then Shaggy, Scooby, and Cass Elliot are in front of one of the Green Glob monsters. It was so abrupt, and it was jarring and out of left field, and I felt like there was like a scene missing or something. Like, it was so out of left field. I don't know what the animators were thinking cutting together like that. Whoever was editing this episode, very odd way to edit the episode, because I feel like something was missing, because it just went from Scooby just simply sniffing, looking for the trail, Mr. Franklin, to bam, all of a sudden they're in front of the Green Glob monster. How? I don't know. It felt like there was a scene missing. It felt like there was a scene building up to that we just missed. Freddy and the girls find a candy machine that's labeled Acme Metal Grinding Machine. Turning it on, they once again hear the grinding noise. Freddy tosses the skeleton key in, and the machine turns it into powder. Freddy also finds some empty city bank bags. More chases occur, and we get more haunted gags involving machinery and candy. Shaggy also accidentally turns himself into one of the green globs using a faulty cotton candy machine. Mistaken by one of the partners, Shaggy gets to work loading candy bars into a truck until Scooby licks all the candy off of Shaggy's face. The rest of the gang are caught up in a mess of purple taffy, and so it's up to Scooby and Shaggy to trap the bad guys. Using bubblegum concentrate, they ultimately fail at trapping the ghost, and Shaggy and Scooby end up getting trapped in the purple taffy with the rest of the gang. I say both of them, but for some reason, it's only shown like that Shaggy gets trapped in it, and then Scooby, is under the table and then comes out when everything's safe. So it's very inconsistent how Scooby gets caught up in the taffy, because in the first scene, it's just implied that not even implied, it's shown that Shaggy just is the one that gets caught up, and then, everyone except Scooby is caught up. Then in the next scene, Scooby is all of a sudden caught up in it. How? I don't know why. I don't know how he did it. I, don't know what happened, but apparently somehow Scooby caught up into it. And then when they go into the rock candy, Scooby also goes in there as well, but nothing happens to Scooby. Like the rest of the gang, when they get out of the rock candy, they get rock hard and then fall over and then break and then get free. Scooby doesn't do that. He just reads the label and just says that it was rock candy. So I don't know what was supposed to be happening. Like, was Scooby supposed to not be in the taffy and these were just animation errors? Was Scooby supposed to be in the taffy? And were the scenes and did they miss a couple bits like Scooby falling off falling over to break himself free from the rock candy? I don't know what the animators were intending. I have no idea. I don't know if Scooby was stuck in that taffy. I don't know if he wasn't. I don't know if it was an animation error or not. I have no clue what just happened. Somehow, Scooby was not in the taffy. Then he was. Then he gets out of the taffy, but nothing happens to him when he goes into the rock candy, unlike the rest of the gang and Cass Elliot, who get rock hard and fall over. What the hell happened? Was Scooby supposed to be in the taffy or not? I gotta know that. Like, it's just very inconsistent. I don't know what the animators were trying to convey in that scene. I don't know if they were trying to convey that Scooby was in the taffy, and he just didn't get affected by the rock candy for some reason, or we missed a scene of him falling over, I don't know. Or if he wasn't supposed to be in the taffy, and that stuff was just an animation error. Either way, just so inconsistent, so weird. I don't know what they were intending with the scene. Outside, the Green Globs are loading up their truck that's heading to Rio, and they figure they have plenty of time to get away now that the gang are trapped. Using their heads, like I said before, the gang free themselves by taking a bath in the tank of rock candy, which washes the taffy up. Fed up, Cass Elliot fires up a forklift and finally traps the Green Globs by hardening them in a mess of candy apple gunk and chocolate. Detective Storm then shows up, and Freddy washes off the green globs, and we discover that it ends up being Mr. Crink, the factory foreman, and Mr. Franklin, the night watchman. But not actually, because it ends up being Sterling Smith, an international gold smuggler. What's interesting about this scene is when Mr. Crink is revealed, there's a fun little meta scene for the audience, saying what me and the audience are probably thinking. They're like, wow, it's Mr. Crink, who would have known? And Shaggy and Scooby both say, I would, like I did, or something to that effect. Like they said they know, like it was obvious to them. And I love that Shaggy said that, because I was like, same, Shaggy, thank you for saying that, because like it was obvious to me too. There was only 2 suspects in this episode, so of course it had to be them. I just thought it was funny.
Right, Cass.
Mr. Crink! The factory foreman! Who would have guessed?
Me!
So like I said before, Velma removes the Mr. Franklin mask, and we learn that it's Sterling Smith, an international gold smuggler. We learn that he robbed a city bank last month of $2 million worth of gold bricks. Using the metal grinder, they pulverized the gold, turning it into chocolate bars and shipping it across the border unnoticed. Seeing as though Shaggy had already eaten a dozen or so of those candy bars as well, he probably has a few grand worth of gold in him as well. And the episode ends with another mystery solved, and the gang, along with Cass Elliot, Detective Storm, and the real Mr. Franklin, sit down to a celebratory meal. I'm going to give Season 2, Episode 7 of the new Scooby-Doo movies 3 stars out of 5. So yeah, we're back on the average train again. At this point, I kind of consider Season 2 of the new Scooby-Doo movies, regardless of how the next and last episode goes, to be quite an average season. Because we've only had one episode that's, been a 4-star, not been a 3-star episode and was 4 stars. Hopefully the next and last episode will be, good along with the Speed Buggy one. Because otherwise, the Speed Buggy one's going to be definitely the only good episode of Season 2. And that's really a shame that most of the season has been average. It's clear to me that Season 1 of the new Scooby-Doo movies was definitely more bold in its choices. And definitely more, at least tried to, go outside the box and try to, it went all over the place and varied from good to bad to average, whereas I think Season 2 has been a little too safe and just, has kind of stayed in this little bubble and just has been very average, to be quite honest. I have more negatives than I do positives, so I'll start off with the positives for the episode first before I get into the negatives and why I think this is a average episode. Starting with the positives, my first one is that I think Fred was a good leader in this episode. I also think he helped piece together the clues to help solve the mystery in this episode. So Fred was quite good. He not only was, pretty much the leader of this episode, maybe apart from Cass Elliot. Cass Elliot did a little bit of leadership too. But he was mostly the leader of this episode, and him and Velma definitely pieced together the clues to help solve the mystery. So Fred was all good on that front. Velma also helped piece together the clues to help solve the mystery. I thought she was good in this episode. Like I said previously, her and Fred kind of, were piecing together the clues that they found and, gave the speech at the end of, what it ended up being and, what the villain's motive was, what their plan was. So Velma fulfilled her role quite well and did her usual shtick of piecing together the clues to help solve the mystery. And then, of course, we have Shaggy and Scooby. So Shaggy and Scooby, as per usual, were their usual funny, cowardly selves. Nothing new there, just their usual funny, cowardly selves. Had a lot of great jokes, had a lot of fun interactions in this episode, especially with Cass Elliot. And, were quite cowardly in this episode. And also, like I mentioned previously, I think they had good chemistry with Cass Elliot. I'll definitely get on to that more once I talk about Cass Elliot herself. But I definitely think Shaggy and Scooby had a good dynamic with Cass Elliot and, definitely worked well with her. So, yeah, Shaggy and Scooby were quite good. They were their usual funny, cowardly selves. They fulfilled their usual roles, and they had good chemistry with the guest star. Then we have the guest star of the episode, Cass Elliot. How was Cass Elliot? She was good in this episode. I actually did like her in this episode. So Cass Elliot definitely was good when it came to, the mystery front. She was a good leader and wanted to help solve the mystery. I feel like when her, Shaggy, and Scooby paired off together while Fred, Daphne, and Velma went to look for clues themselves, I feel like she was kind of, fulfilled the leadership role when Fred wasn't there and very much led the way and wanted to help find Mr. Franklin and figure out what was going on with her candy factory, because this is her candy factory. She owned it. So she wanted to know what happened, what was going on with it, why these ghosts were haunting it, these green globs. So I thought Cass Elliot was good on that front. And like I said before, I think she had good chemistry with Shaggy and Scooby. And that's probably due to the fact that their shared feeling of, hunger and food. Cass Elliot, like Shaggy and Scooby, love food. And they talked about food a lot and had a lot of good food set pieces. So it made sense that Cass Elliot paired up with Shaggy and Scooby and, talked about food a lot and, how she was trying to go on a diet with grapefruit, and witnessing Shaggy and Scooby eat food, made her want to eat food. So that was kind of an interesting dynamic. But also what was interesting about Cass Elliot is that she wasn't cowardly like Shaggy and Scooby. She did run when she needed to, but she definitely was the straight woman when it came to it. She definitely grounded Shaggy and Scooby a little bit. So despite their shared love of, food and, being hungry, Cass Elliot was definitely the straight woman and the leader and the one kind of taking charge usually. Usually that would be Shaggy's role when they split up. Usually Shaggy would be the one leading the way. But, now since Cass Elliot was the guest star, they gave her kind of that fulfilled that role. And so Shaggy was able to be a bit more looser and kind of, just let, of course, Shaggy and Cass Elliot did interact well, as well. They definitely came up with some ideas, of how to do things. So I do think that, overall, I think the chemistry was unique in that, while Cass Elliot certainly shared Shaggy and Scooby's love for food and loved talking about food and joking about food and had a lot of food set pieces, she definitely was a bit more braver than Shaggy and Scooby and wasn't as cowardly as them. She did obviously run away when she had to, but she also was the straight woman and the one that kind of, led charge. But she also got jokes put at her, like, sometimes fat jokes and, all that. But then she would clap back at Shaggy and Scooby and joke about their cowardice. So it kind of worked both ways. Like, Shaggy and Scooby, had some jokes about Cass Elliot's weight, and Cass Elliot, kind of, poked fun at their manhood and how they were cowardly and, chicken and all that. So I feel like, it evened out well enough, and I feel like it was good. I think they had a fun little dynamic together, and I think it was a good pair up. It makes sense because Cass Elliot, it made sense that she would want to, since she owns this candy factory and she's a big woman who loves, food, it makes sense that she would want to be with Shaggy and Scooby. They would pair her up with Shaggy and Scooby for most of the episode because of her love of food, just like Shaggy and Scooby. And it gave them the opportunity to have fun jokes back and forth and poke fun at each other's, natures and how they were and, how they acted and how they looked and all that. So I thought the dynamic was pretty cool. So I think Cass Elliot was great. She not only was a good leader and tried to help solve the mystery, but she had good chemistry with Shaggy and Scooby throughout the episode due to their shared love of food. Obviously, she had moments with Fred, Daphne, and Velma, but I definitely think her dynamic with Shaggy and Scooby really was the backbone for her in this episode. She definitely had way more chemistry with Shaggy and Scooby than she did Fred, Daphne, and Velma. She had her moments with them, but this was an episode where Cass Elliot definitely paired up with Shaggy and Scooby and had a lot of food set pieces together, which, like I said, makes sense because of their shared love of food. It made sense that Cass Elliot would be paired up with Shaggy and Scooby. And I thought it was unique. She got to be the straight woman, but she also got to be poked fun at and made jokes about and, made, a little bit funny. So she was sometimes funny, sometimes straight, and same with Shaggy and Scooby, so I like Cass Elliot in this episode. Good chemistry with Shaggy and Scooby and good leadership and wanting to help solve the mystery. I thought the mystery of the episode was also good as well. So you wanted to know who these green globs were because you never knew like what they were. Were they ghosts of actual people? Were they, some type of monsters from another realm? Like what exactly were these green globs? And Why were they haunting this candy factory? What was their reason for haunting this particular candy factory? And why were they doing weird things with candy bars? Like, why were they making candy and all that and loading it into a truck? What was their, intent? What was their goal? So there was a lot of cool questions throughout, and a good mystery to hook you, wondering what these things were and why they were haunting the candy factory and doing weird things with, the candy itself. I found the clues of the episode to also be good as well. So you had the metal grinding machine as well as the empty Citibank money bags. So those two kind of explained like the process of how, the villains were able to accomplish what they were, planning to do with, the money. What their motive was and how they were accomplishing it. So, they were the metal grinding machine explained how they they grinded the gold into powder or dust or whatever you want to call it. And the empty money bags was, what they were putting into the grinder. So the empty money bags, were, where the gold was. And the grinding machine was how they got the gold into the candy bars and why they were making candy bars, because they were trying to, transport the gold into a foreign country and get it across, and, flee the country with $2 million worth of gold. So I thought the clues were good. They explain, how what the villains were doing and motive-wise and how they were accomplishing it. And then finally we have the setting of the episode. So the setting of the episode was the Sugar Plum Candy Factory that was owned by Cass Elliot. I thought the Sugar Plum Candy Factory was pretty cool setting. I think it was something different and, fresh. It fit the guest star of the episode well. It was cool, that Cass Elliot owned this candy factory. It makes sense, for her love of food. It made sense that she would own a factory that makes food. And like I said, it's something we hadn't seen yet before, a candy factory. It was also a bit creepy with how empty and deserted the factory was and how, there were practically no workers. It was just Cass Elliot and this night watchman. The foreman left, presumably, although we find out later that he was one of the villains, and that was just an act. But it was literally just her and the watchman and, the gang. So it was all empty and deserted, as well as, it being nighttime out. It was dark, the gang had, and, there was lightning coming from the sky. It had a nice, cool little, build up to it, and definitely was a cool setting. Had a lot of interesting set pieces involving food, particularly sweets, basically candy and anything related to candy or anything, dessert wise, mostly. And I thought it was really cool that we got to explore a setting that, was very food driven. And like I said, that made sense because it fit with the guest star well, and, and it also fit Shaggy and Scooby quite well, too. It gave them a setting where, yeah, they were creeped out, but they also got to have a lot of fun set pieces with food. So I found the Candy Factory to be quite a fun and different type of setting. Not the creepiest setting, not the typical Scooby-Doo setting, or at least not fully executed maybe to the potential it could have been, but definitely a pretty good setting, and I liked it. But that's all I got for positives. So I think it's about time we get on to the negatives of the episode and what I didn't like about it. So starting off the negatives, my first one is that I think Daphne was quite weak in this episode. I didn't really find anything interesting about Daphne in this episode. I don't think she really did much. She had small moments here and there, but I don't think enough to really warrant her to have any sort of defining, trait in this episode or any sort of involvement or any sort of role. I just kind of felt like Daphne was there and didn't really do much for the episode and didn't really have anything going for her. And I think that's quite a shame, especially with how well the last episode I felt, did a good enough job with the gang. I don't think Daphne really did much in this episode. I thought the villains of the episode were quite poorly executed. So the villains of the episode were, of course, the Green Globs. The Green Globs did not really make much of an impression. I feel like there was a potential to have the Green Globs be very, quite creepy and scary. I don't think they executed them to their full potential because they definitely didn't do enough to really make much of an impression. I was honestly so, torn with the villains because on the one hand, they did have moments where they were kind of cool, but then on the other hand, they didn't really I kept thinking about it and thinking like, yeah, they didn't really do much to stand out. And I ultimately just decided that they just weren't executed well enough for me to consider them good in this episode. They certainly had the potential to be good, but they just didn't execute it properly like I would have liked. You know, they definitely had a cool enough design and, you know, had a cool, you know, voices and, you know, made threats towards the gang. And yeah, they did try, you know, to get rid of them a few times, like, you know, but they tried to, you know, kill them with food or like trap them in food. So it's like, that's not really scary when you're trying to trap or kill the gang with food because, spoilers, Shaggy and Scooby and Cass Elliot are quite, you know, quite love food and will eat through it. Now, Cass Elliot doesn't do that in this episode, but Shaggy and Scooby certainly do. And, you know, I just kind of feel like these green globs just didn't really do much to make an impression. I didn't find them scary enough. I don't think they had many moments where they were scary. I also didn't find them funny or entertaining enough for me to enjoy them. Like I said, some potential there, but definitely not executed to their full potential. They definitely needed a little more time, you know, to develop and, you know, become better, because what ended up happening in this episode was the villains just didn't really stand out in a good enough way. They just, you know, they had the potential to be good, but they definitely didn't execute it as well as they could have, and it's a shame. But yeah, good designs, but not good execution. I also found the villains outside of costume to be quite weak as well. So you had Mr. Crink the foreman, who was one of the Green Globs, and then the other one was Sterling Smith, dressed up as Mr. Franklin. They were both very uninteresting and made very little to no impression. In regards to Sterling Smith, you guys know I don't really like the double disguise thing because we don't really get to know the person there, and so like his moments as as dressing up as Mr. Franklin, which I think was like 2 scenes. Had that actually been Mr. Franklin, maybe I would have actually considered Mr. Franklin good outside of costume, but because it wasn't and it was an act, I don't know who Sterling Smith is other than he's just an international, you know, gold smuggler. But, you know, who is he as a person? I just don't know. Like, we never get to know that, and it's just a criminal that, you know, disguises as another person. And that's quite lame, to be quite honest. Like, I don't really like when they do that, because we don't really get to know them that well. And, you know, double disguises are just usually quite annoying. Unless if we've seen both personas in the episode, it becomes quite annoying. As for Mr. Crink, I think him, you know, he had one scene, and he didn't really do much other than call the factory creepy and haunted, and, you know, said he was leaving. And that was it. Like, he just pretty much played an act. And we didn't really get to know him other than he was just the foreman for, you know, Cass Elliot and her factory. That was it. We didn't know who he was, you know, as a person. You know, we didn't really get to know him as you know, a person. So, and he didn't really do much outside of costume other than just have that one scene. So he really made no impression either. So both were weak outside of costume. Didn't really... one of them we never saw until he was unmasked, and the other one we only saw in like one scene and didn't really do much other than outside of that scene. So yeah, uninteresting outside of costume. I found the motive of the episode to be quite poorly executed as well. So I like the idea of them smuggling gold outside of the country in candy bars. I think that's a cool and unique idea. I think that's pretty cool and neat idea. However, I'm really unsure what they were going to do with it once they got into Brazil and how they were going to sell it. What was their goal after they had loaded these candy bars and gotten across to Brazil? How were they going to sell these candy bars filled with $2 million worth of gold? Who's going to buy that in Brazil? Like, what was their plan? Were they going to melt the chocolate and try to sell the powder? Were they going to melt the chocolate and put the powder into something else and try to sell it? Or were they just going to try and sell these candy bars filled with gold? I'm really confused what their end game was other than they just wanted out of the country, and I don't think they really thought it through. Like, yeah, it's a pretty neat and cool idea, but what were they going to do with the gold? How were they going to get it out of the candy bars? And how were they going to sell it and make a profit off of it? Or were they going to try and sell the candy bars filled with gold and make a profit off of that? If so, how was that going to work? You know, there's just a lot of questions with the motive, and I'm just unsure what their goal was at the end, other than they just wanted to get it across, you know, to a different country, into Brazil. They just wanted to get it out of the country and go to Brazil and you know, have, and, you know, essentially sell it somehow. But I'm unsure how they were going to sell it and what means they were going to do it. So all these questions just left it very poorly executed. Nice idea for a motive, but definitely needed more time, you know, to flesh out the answers. Definitely needed to come up with some more answers to try and, you know, try to explain to the audience what they were intending to do with the candy bars filled with gold once they got to Brazil. How were they going to sell it? How are they going to make a profit off of it? There just wasn't any sort of answers to these questions. So I'm left thinking, like, you know, this is just a poorly executed motive and that they didn't really think this through. There was a lack of suspects in the episode, with there only being 2 suspects in the episode. There was Mr. Crank the foreman and Mr. Franklin the night watchman. Other than that, those were the only 2, and surprise, surprise, you know, it ended up being both of them, although technically it wasn't the real Mr. Franklin. It was just someone dressed up as him, but still, it still ended up being both of them, and, you know, there's 2 villains, 2 suspects. Most likely it's going to be those 2 guys. Very unlikely that it's going to be 2 unnamed guys or 1 guy that we saw and another unnamed guy. So yeah, just very predictable, you know, not really much there. Just, you know, definitely could have done with maybe another suspect or 2. Definitely would have been better had we had 3 to 4 suspects. That way we could have at least had some more, you know, leeway into guessing who the 2 villains could be. And finally, I found the atmosphere of the episode to be kind of lackluster in my mind. I mean, I really didn't feel any sort of tension or suspense or creepiness or eeriness. I just didn't really fear for the gang's safety. I wasn't on the edge of my seat wondering what's going to happen next. And I wasn't really too creeped out by a lot of things or found anything really eerie. There was definitely potential here. You know, you had the dark night along with, you know, with lightning, along with it being a not abandoned, but a deserted, you know, candy factory with no one there except for Cass Elliot and a few others. It could have really actually been good had they just fleshed out a little bit, but I just think they didn't really execute it to its full potential. Which is why I just don't really like the atmosphere of this episode. There just was no tension or suspense. Like I said, didn't fear for the gang's safety. Wasn't on the edge of my seat. But didn't really find much creepiness or eeriness in the episode. I wasn't really creeped out or felt that there was anything eerie in the episode. It just was very lackluster in my mind. So while there was certainly potential to have atmosphere, I think it was squandered because the villains weren't executed to their full potential. And while the setting was good, the atmosphere was definitely probably hindered by the food, because food's not inherently something scary or creepy. But, you know, I mean, had the villains done a couple more things, I think I would have forgave it. You know, I like the food gimmick, don't get me wrong, but I just think, like, the atmosphere didn't really, you know, get executed well enough. Mainly due to the villains just not being much of a threat or really scary, and not much of the setting, you know, being threatening or scary either. It was definitely a little bit creepy and eerie that it was like a deserted, you know, candy factory, but, you know, an empty candy factory with only Cass Elliot and the gang and this night watchman. But, you know, outside of that, there just wasn't really much of this atmosphere. So, yeah, very lackluster atmosphere. Had the potential, but they just didn't really execute it to its full potential. Overall, guys, I would not recommend this episode to fans and newcomers of the show. It's just honestly very average and very forgettable. It's just not one of the better episodes in the new Scooby-Doo movies. It's just okay. It's decent. It has good aspects to it, but overall, it's just not one of the more memorable ones. It's not because of the fat jokes or anything like that. Like, some land, some don't. But I think really what it comes down to is just a lot of poor execution on a lot of fronts. The villains, the atmosphere, and, you know, basically the motive. All that stuff, had they been executed a little bit better, I could have easily seen this as maybe a 4-star episode. And maybe had they cleaned up even more, it could have been a 5-star. But as it is, it just was not executed as well as it could have been. And there just was a lot more issues with it than there was positives. So while it's not the worst episode of the series, it's definitely one of those episodes of the new Scooby-Doo movies that's just kind of okay and you know, isn't bad, but you're not going to remember it after you watch it, unless if you're a huge Cass Elliot fan and enjoy seeing her interact with the gang. Outside of that, there's not much novelty with this episode. Definitely not one of the better episodes in my mind. For, you know, it definitely is in the camp with, you know, the Globetrotters episode and probably the Tim Conway one, where it's just, it's fine, but it's not one you're going to think about afterwards. It's quite forgettable. Anyways, I hope you guys enjoyed the review. Please give a like if you did. Comment down below your thoughts on the episode. Do you like this episode? Do you see more good in it than I do? Do you think, you know, I'm not giving it enough credit and you see more positives with it? Do you hate this episode? I'd be interested in that as well. Do you see more flaws with it? Do you see more problems with it? You know, is it not really an episode you're a big fan of? Or are you somewhere in the middle like me, where you just think it's okay, it's fine, and it's average, but it's, you know, quite forgettable and not one of them, you know, definitely not one you're gonna, you know, that's gonna stick with you afterwards. I'm curious for your thoughts, so let me know. And subscribe for more Scooby-Doo content like this, or if you're just interested in any of my other content, we will continue with more Scooby-Doo content, as this is a Scooby-Doo focused channel. I have plenty more Scooby-Doo content coming, both, you know, review-wise and gaming-wise, so be on the lookout. And if you love Scooby-Doo, if you love talking about all things Scooby-Doo, come join the channel, and we can have the discussion about individual episodes, movies, games, and, you know, books, and give Scooby the proper love and attention he deserves. So in my next video, I will conclude my reviews of the new Scooby-Doo movies with my Season 2, Episode 8 review of the new Scooby-Doo movies, titled The Haunted Carnival, guest starring Dick Van Dyke. And I've heard good things about the last episode of the new Scooby-Doo movies. But yeah, this is the final episode of Season 2 of the new Scooby-Doo movies. And the final episode of the new Scooby-Doo movies overall. It's been a year, but we're about to finish the new Scooby-Doo movies. And wow, what a ride it's been. It's honestly incredible that we're now at the end of the new Scooby-Doo movies, and we will be moving on to the Scooby-Doo show next. I personally am very excited and cannot wait, you know, to finish off the new Scooby-Doo movies and get on to another good show, which is the Scooby-Doo show. It's certainly going to be fun. And, you know, it's going to be fun talking about the last episode of the new Scooby-Doo movies and the final guest star of the series, Dick Van Dyke. But like I said, I've heard good things about it. I remember liking this episode, so hopefully we will end the series and Season 2 on a high note, and it'll be one of the better episodes of the series, but we will see. So if you want to know my thoughts on the final episode of not only Season 2, but the new Scooby-Doo movies as a whole, then come join me next week, where we will conclude my reviews of the new Scooby-Doo movies, and also talk about the special features as well, since I like to do that every time I finish the show. I like to talk about the special features and give them their credit, you know, their dues as well. So yeah, should be a pretty lengthy video next week. Anyways, thank you guys so much for watching this video, and as always, peace out.
Scooby-Doo, looking for you. Scooby-Doo, where are you?
Over there.
All the stars are here, waiting for you. Couldn't have a show without you. Scooby,